justice for the blind, just something that'll find in the rhymes that are coming from our mind.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 476ers podcast. This is episode, oh shit, I just went through this. I think it's episode 30. It might be 31 though.
Yeah, you said 31.
I said just 31. Okay, so this might be episode 31. I did a whole graphic for it yesterday too. You know what I mean? Somebody put me onto Canva, and I've been like really working hard on it. Anyway, so welcome to episode 31 of the podcast. We are going to be doing something a little bit different today. So we're going to talk about what I what I called the forgotten players, and then essentially took the meaning of that and changed it 4 different times over the last week. So credit to Vic. Vic, say hello real quick.
You.
Credit to Vic, who is really took the Bruce Lee teaching of staying like water to heart, because I throw curveballs at him constantly. And yeah, essentially what I told him was I wanted to do a forgotten players list, and with the premise of blowing Chris Paul for the next, I don't know, hour or so, whatever. Because people have forgotten when. So this is how this started, Vic, just to give you a quick background. So the other day I was thinking like, what I was going to say was let's do a draft of all-time players, right? And I was like, but it'd be boring to do an all-time player draft when we know, okay, first pick, you got Michael. Second pick, I got LeBron. Third pick, you got Magic. Fourth pick, I got Larry. And it's like, right, we're not actually expanding any type of conversation. We're just going to talk about the guys that we already know are the greatest. You know what I mean? So then I was like, well, what if we did, like a draft taking out the top 15 players? You know what I mean? But then I was like, that's just getting too much. So I was like, let's do a list of guys who are either forgotten, disrespected for different reasons. People just don't understand why they were great in the time. So that was kind of what I was thinking. You went old school with yours, which is fantastic. Mine's is I have one player that is old, that retired in the 70s. And then the rest of my players are 90s, 2000, pretty much. One guy who obviously, Chris Paul, who bleeds into the 2010s. Doesn't bleed into the 2010s, has now completed the 2010s and is bleeding into the 2020s. All right, so let's get started. We're not going to do this draft. I just want you to tell me who is the first player that you have on your list or that you want to talk about first that you think is forgotten. Who you got?
Just real quick, like every few minutes on my end, you sound like mad weird.
Okay. All right, that could just be
right now. You sound normal, but I don't know what you sound like on your end. I'm assuming you just sound normal.
Yeah, I think it's probably the network on your end is cutting out on my voice, which is fine because I'm the host recorder. So my voice is going to be clear here. And this is great because then if you ever disagree with me, I can always just say that you went out a little bit. You know what I mean? And then I could just yeah.
Cool.
All right. So go ahead. Who's the first guy you got?
All right. So my first guy is Tiny Nate Archibald. Constantly forgotten out of all the great lead guards. The only player to lead the league in assists and points in the same season. That was the 72-73 season where he averaged 34 points, 11 assists. I think for like the diehard fans, that was the excuse was, that was the era of taking a million shots and pace was up. That was also around the same time that Oscar would have averaged his triple-double.
Mm-hmm.
But Oscar gets mentioned all the time, and Nate never does. Mm-hmm. And their careers are very similar in the fact that, they had lots of success early on. He was an all-star 6 times. He was, a top 10 player for at least 5 or 6 years of his career. So basically half his career.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't win a championship until, later in his career when he finally started to give up the stats and be part of a team, which he ended up doing with the 81 Celtics. Like with Oscar, really not winning anything until he played with Kareem and was willing to give up shots and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But still, a really good player. Did end up being a starter on a championship team and put up crazy numbers
Hmm.
throughout his career.
Yeah, man, that's a hell of a start. Now, I don't have a lot to say about Tiny except for like you already said, he
Hmm.
doesn't have a lot of winning seasons. Even that year, if I'm not mistaken, when he leads the league in points and assists, they're on a losing team, if I'm not mistaken. I think they finished below 500 that year, which listen, if in today's day and age, Russ wins the MVP doing something almost similar on
Hmm.
a team that barely finishes 500 and squeaks into the playoffs, and credit to Russ. This is not to take credit away from Russ, but I think people sometimes will remember Tiny in that negative light. Well, yeah, he had points and assists on a losing team. And it's like, yeah, but you're kind of disrespecting the fact that teams like need to be built. You know what I mean? He doesn't have, if I'm
Hmm.
not mistaken, I don't even know if he plays with any other Hall of Famers on that team, on that Royals team early on, that then becomes the Kansas City Kings. Um,
Hmm.
and to your credit, like you said, he gets to the Celtics. Is he still starting when he wins that championship on the Celtics? He is, right?
Yeah, he's one of the starting guards.
Yeah, so he's
Um,
the one of the starting guards on that team. Man,
hmm.
that's a great pick. Um, that's a great pick. Not I don't think a lot of people know Tiny. He scores 17,000 points. And it's also important to remember that so Tiny plays 14 seasons, I think it is. Um, and he's a second round pick, even though the second round pick he's 19th overall in 1970. So I'm reading that right now
Yeah,
just to
there
say.
was like that was back when there was like 7 rounds.
Yeah, yeah, and there's just
And yes,
also not a lot of teams also. So the 19th overall
yeah,
pick is in the second round.
yeah, no, and you are correct that the Kings in 72, 73 went 36 and 46,
Mm-hmm.
but uh they that record gave them fourth place
Oh,
uh in the Midwest division. So
mm-hmm.
they were like at the bottom of their like own
Yep.
division.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I don't think he plays with a lot of many, if any, All Stars on that team. Six-time
No,
NBA
there's
All
like
Star.
not a lot.
Yeah, I don't think so. Five-time All
Not any.
NBA. And what's important to note again about a lot of these older players. So he finishes scoring 17,000 points, but plays 14 seasons, and that's the story for a lot of players, especially at this time. Outside of like Kareem, there's just not a lot of guys that are going for 20 years. You know what I mean? Whereas
Yeah.
now, like a guy like Karl Malone can exhaust the stats, can exhaust the points list, or a guy like LeBron, same thing, can exhaust the lists of all-time scorers and rebounds and assists just by longevity. That doesn't exist back then, and is actually going to take effect for one of the guys that I have on my list. Um, okay, great pick, great start. So I'm going to go with my first pick. So this is not the first name on my list, but this is the best player on my list, and
Hmm.
who at the time, people may not realize this, is at the time was considered the best basketball player of all time at the time. Uh, and this is the logo, Jerry West. I don't know if you have him on
Hmm.
your list, but I'm going to talk
Hmm.
about Jerry here. So Jerry West, just a couple things that I wrote down. Now Jerry West, he plays 14 years in the NBA. Is an all-star all 14 of those years. Is also all NBA 12 times in that time, and 5-time all defense. Um, Finishes his career averaging 27 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists. And like I said, at the time, is considered the greatest player of all time. By the time his career finishes, this is the number one guy. This is how he becomes the logo. But more importantly than just the averages, right? 27, 7, and 6. I mean, that's fantastic. That's tick below LeBron right there, right? For his career average, 20th all time in win shares at 162.58. But his playoff numbers, one of the few NBA superstars whose playoff numbers actually take a leap in the playoffs. He averages, and I forgot to write his shooting percentage here down for the regular season, but in the playoffs, his percentages are 47% shooting, averages 29, 6, and 6. This is without free pointers. So he essentially is taking a leap in the playoffs without any additional way to score more points, is just raising his game. One of the few players, obviously the only player in NBA history to win a Finals MVP on a losing team in a losing effort. In a time when the championship teams were somewhat stacked, I guess you could say we're somewhat stacked. He played with Elgin for the majority of Elgin's career. Elgin came in before Jerry, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And then Jerry plays the majority. Elgin ends up retiring earlier the year that they actually trade for Wilt, if I'm not mistaken. Elgin retires, and then Jerry and Wilt go on to win a championship finally, before Jerry goes on to retire. And one last thing about Jerry West, but before I stop talking about him, we talked on the Last Dance pod about how great players, all-time great players, make shitty executives, shitty coaches, shitty everything. And that's not really the story for Jerry West. Jerry West's secondary career is also Hall of Fame worthy. If he was just an executive and not a player, he would go into the Hall of Fame for being an executive, for building the Warriors dynasty. He helps build the Lakers. If he helps build the Lakers, he's on the staff that helps trade for Paul Gasol, if I'm not mistaken, before he ends up going to the Warriors, helps build that championship team, and now is on the Clippers. And, well, shit, I don't know if they're going to win a championship, but they're pretty damn close. This is the closest they've ever been to winning a championship, arguably, with this roster.
Mm-hmm.
So credit to Jerry West. What do you got to say about Jerry?
Yeah, he was the only player to lose a finals and win a finals MVP. And yeah, a guy who was incredibly prolific scorer with no 3-point line, and very clutch. A couple, like if you go back and watch some of the game film, you'll see him having a couple game-saving heaves from 60 feet or whatever. And today that would have won them the game, and that just pushes games into overtime for the Lakers in the 70s. And especially in a time where guards were not considered players you could build on. You in the Last Dance doc, you hear it all the time where Krause and them are saying "Oh, I wish Michael was 7 feet tall," and it's like, what? Do you see what he's doing? Why does it matter how tall he is?
Yeah,
but yeah, in a time.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you. I didn't mean to. Go ahead.
Just in a time where guards, were considered the second fiddle. He was incredible, and his whole career, his lowest scoring average was 17, and that was his rookie year. His final year in the league, he's still averaging over 20 points a game.
Yeah,
incredible.
Yeah, which is to his credit. That's why, and some of these, for a lot of these guys, for one of these guys on the list, especially on my list, their averages suffer. And this is happening. I think this is happening more. Well, no, because you could say this happened with Bill Walton too, especially. But the longer their careers go, their averages are starting to go down, especially their playoff averages. It's rare that you see a guy essentially go out just in the middle of his prime almost. You know what I mean? He's still what Jerry West essentially leaves at a time. What was he, 35 when he retired? In today's NBA, people would probably be looking at him to play another 5 years at the averages he was averaging at that time. So, and to your credit, I mean, in the documentary, they have Clyde Frazier, who just a championship winning point guard, who they win the championship. I mean, who's what's his face, the other Hall of Famer, who comes out with the with Willis Reed, but really Clyde Frazier is arguably the best player on that team, and even Clyde comes out and says, MJ needs to understand that you can't build a team around a smaller guy who needs the ball. Well, Jerry West, who plays, he intersects with Clyde, kind of you would think is the exception to that rule. Obviously, he comes before Clyde, but that's my first guy, Jerry West. There's a reason why he's the logo. He's one of the best scorers in time. And specifically, the reason why I wanted to bring him up is because people this sounds like Kobe hate, and I don't want that to be the case, but I just want to put it in perspective. When people say Kobe is the greatest Laker of all time, that means that Kobe has to be vaulted into the top 8. You know what I mean? And he's not necessarily in my top 8. But
Mhm.
in Jerry West, well, I'm sorry, no, to say that he's the greatest Laker of all time means Kobe has to be top 5, because that means he's greater than
Yes,
Magic, and he's not greater than Magic.
correct.
And the
Or
real
Kareem.
conversation is he greater than Jerry West? You know what I mean? Now, Kobe has a
Mhm.
longer career, but damn, Jerry's fucking career is impressive, and people kind of need to understand this is not to shit on Kobe. It's to say that, yeah, Kobe's very fucking great, but Jerry West was also very fucking great at his time. So yeah, that's my last bit on Jerry West. Who you got next?
Just a last thought. So that they finally win in that 71-72 season, the Lakers.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, that's the season that Elgin actually retires early on in that year, and they finally win it, which is like heartbreaking thing for all of them. But also at the time, that was like considered one of the greatest teams ever. They finished with 69 wins that year, which was the highest total.
Yeah.
Even higher than the record set previously by the Sixers team Wilt played for with 67 wins that won the title.
That's a great point. Thank you for adding that point. That's a great point.
What Clyde would say is that all that didn't happen until Wilt got there.
Yeah.
With the whole big man thing. But anyway,
You're probably right. But whatever, Clyde. Listen, I'm taking Jerry over Clyde every day of the goddamn week, twice on Sunday. So you know what I mean.
But great setup though. I'll jump down my list a little bit. Not that they're in any order. I just wrote them down this way. Willis Reed is on my list.
Okay, let's go.
I think for diehard NBA fans, about the Willis Reed game, quote unquote, where he gets 2 cc's of cortisone and comes out and plays basically with one leg. He's literally limping around. And it looks so wild because like they're wearing these weird jerseys with like the collar comes all the way down to show like cleavage, and he definitely is wearing like a long necklace while he's playing. And like he only scores like 4 points in that game. So, but it's the first like 4 points.
Those are the 2 famous jump shots he hits. Go ahead. I'm sorry, not to
correct.
Cut you.
Over Wilt and a really really good Lakers team. But if you saw that footage, he looks really like ginger and hurt. But that's all kind of people know about him. And I think exactly as you were talking about, especially because of his broadcasting career now, and that he's like been in the public eye forever. Walt Frazier has kind of become sort of the face of that team, that Knicks era, especially because, like I said, he's still famous, still walks, people still talk about him, the whole suits, broadcasting. But Willis was the heart and soul of that team. A lot of that too is like as you just stated, players didn't play as long. This is still an era where a lot of players still had other jobs.
Yep.
Like being an NBA player wasn't like the whole thing. Like, so he played only 10 years, which is still a long time. But for like great players, we're thinking a minimum of 12, 15 years and having like 10 All-Stars. But he only plays 10. And of those 10, 7 times he's an All-Star. But he's a Finals MVP twice and a League MVP once. He was Rookie of the Year. Out of the 10 years he played, half of those he's a top 5 player. At his 5-year best, he was 21 points, 14 rebounds, and 2 assists, and shot 50% from the field. And like I said, won 2 championships in 10 years. Where the league, because it was so few teams, as you pointed out, it was pretty stacked teams.
Yeah.
So it was a lot, and they rode him. It's probably why the reason that his career wasn't as long as it probably would have been. But yeah, no, a really really good player that mostly gets remembered for that one game instead of the body of his career.
Yeah, no, great point. One thing too to point out about Willis is, in today's NBA, he is maybe a power forward, and could just about his height. Might be, guarding some threes in certain situations. Only 6'9". But to your point, he averages 14 rebounds a game at that height against like monsters of the fucking NBA. Against Will, he sees Kareem, he sees just some of the monsters of the game, other great players, and here he is just outworking the majority of guys that he's facing. I think to his credit. And to your point about him being the heart and soul of the team, what's really important about those two jump shots. Yeah, I don't even know if he plays really the rest of the game after those two jump shots. I thought, and I could be wrong, after he hits those shots, he comes out shortly after and doesn't really play anymore. But those are those two plays are essentially what galvanizes the rest of that Knicks team. Essentially sobers up Phil Jackson, and is what propels them to win that championship. And he wins the Finals MVP that year, essentially not playing the final game. The majority of the final game, hitting those two jump shots and kind of just bouncing. So I think that's a great call out, a historic score. I mean, yeah, look at Wilt 7-1, Kareem 7-2. And here's this 6'9", just outworking them. So yeah, that's a great point. He is the best player on that Knicks team for sure, with Walt Frazier being the famous one. So I think that's a great call out, a great point to make, because what Walt still is, he's aged well and is, still a broadcaster on the Knicks, but and you know what, probably even to do a quick callback, probably one of the reasons why Walt is saying that about MJ at that time is because, yeah, he just played with Willis and he knows, yeah, you need a great big man if you're going to win. So that's a great point. All right, let's move on here. So you know what? Let's stay in the Knicks era. I'm going to come a little bit more recent, and I'm going to talk about Patrick Ewing for a bit. Patrick Ewing is the forgotten center of the 90s, I would say, partly because he doesn't win, and partly because, he comes along at a time where, one, he's drafted the same year as MJ is drafted. And then, right, is he drafted? Yeah, he's drafted the same year as MJ is drafted. And is shoehorned kind of in the middle of Hakeem's greatness, of David Robinson's fucking explosive scoring. He is coincided with the beginning of the Shaq era, and just can't get past MJ and the Bulls, which is the story for a lot of great players. Patrick is you could argue is the greatest Knicks center of all time, in front of Willis Reed. You could make the argument. Averages of 21, 10, 2.4 blocks. That's his career average at 50% field goal shooting. But important to note that Patrick's career ends in a whimper on Orlando. And, just kind of brings down those numbers. He's 39th all-time in win shares at 126. And in the playoffs, is just steady. 20 points, 10 rebounds, and 2.2 blocks. 47% in the playoffs, so it drops down a little bit, which is, again, aside from Jerry West, outside of Jerry West, the majority of NBA players, their playoffs, their percentages take a hit when they get into the playoffs. Right. So, not a big deal, but I think people sometimes remember Patrick for the massive knee pads, for missing that bunny layup. Yeah. You know what I mean? For missing the bunny layup and stuff like that. But this was a defensive presence in the NBA. This is one of the best all-time NBA centers. If he comes into the NBA today, is immediately vaults whatever team he's on into finals contention. I mean, let's say Patrick Ewing was the first overall pick. I'm not even going to say he goes to the Thunder. I mean, to the Warriors. But let's say Patrick Ewing comes in and is, I don't even know who's in contention right now for the worst records right now. The Hawks. And let's say Patrick is picked by the Hawks. Well, guess what? Next year, the Hawks are going to be in the playoffs very easily. And yeah, I mean, people just forget. People forget. Even the documentary that the most famous documentary we have now, kind of that include the Knicks, is the Reggie Miller documentary, and that's all about Reggie. You know what I mean? Kind of just torturing them. But even that's a little overblown. Mm-hmm. Reggie's numbers against the Knicks are not fantastic. He doesn't necessarily beat them every year. the Knicks are stopped by the Bulls. There was a great stat I read about. I'm not gonna remember what the stat was, but essentially the stat was just that in the '93 playoffs, I want to say it was, that that the Knicks were by most statistical measures were the team right behind the Bulls. They are right under the Bulls, essentially saying if they go to the finals, they're winning that year, and they just couldn't get past the Bulls. And that's the story of Patrick's career. He's not the flashy scorer that David Robinson was, or that Hakeem was. And Hakeem gets those two titles when Jordan evacuates the throne to allow someone to get them. And Patrick then runs smack dab into Shaq. And you know, that's kind of the end of Patrick's career, but one of the all-time great centers. What do you got to say about Patrick?
Yeah, man, Pat was drafted the year after Jordan, because he stayed all 4 years at Georgetown, and Michael left after his third year at UNC. But yeah, he's the first overall pick in '93. They're the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, a few games behind the Sun. And yeah, they go to, I think, Game 7 with the Bulls in '93 and lose. And that was like sort of their best chance.
And I think that's the MJ scores 54 against them that year, if I'm not mistaken, in the playoffs. But go ahead. I'm sorry, not to cut you off.
Yeah, no, it's just another one of those guys that ran up against Jordan. And once Jordan leaves, they lose. I think they lose the '94 finals to the Rockets, and then the following year the Spurs lose to the Rockets.
Yeah.
When Olajuwon gets all up in
the Magic.
Oh,
the Magic.
Spurs,
the Magic.
Yeah, the Magic lose to the Rockets. Yeah. But that was the year Olajuwon was famous for getting inside Dave Robinson's asshole. But anyway, yeah, and I think the team, like Pat Riley, gets a lot of credit for being a great coach and GM and president and all that, and he is. But the one thing that the New York team was always lacking was a perimeter creator, somebody who can get his own shot on the perimeter, but also get a good shot for his teammates. Where like most of their guards, like first it was Mark Jackson, who was very much so past first point guard, and then most of his game was transition or half court posting up, which you can't do when you have your whole front line as post players essentially. And then after Mark, it was just, you know, a bunch of different guys, Doc Rivers, Derek Harper, John Starks. Like none of these guys you could really rely on in key moments, in particular John Starks.
Yeah.
But all those other guys were like pass first guys. Then you had, like, imagine that team. Like, it's just, and like, they're not as hard to watch as you would assume. Just because of how much athleticism is on the floor, even though they're all like enormous human beings. But man, like, talk about no spacing. You got Pat Oakley, Charles Oakley, that is, and then like Xavier McDaniels. Or whoever else, and it's like, how are you guys, or Mason, how are you guys scoring ever? You should be really easy to guard. How is Patrick ever getting room in the post? And I think that's just the fault of the times. I think you add a couple more guys. You add if they had like a small forward, that'd be more of a swingman than a bigger guy, and they had a guard that could create his own shot. I think Patrick's career is a lot different than it ended up being, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, and even to that point, I think right now I've watched a good amount of Knicks games over the last couple of weeks, and I don't know why. Maybe I guess that's why I put Patrick in here, because I've somehow ended up watching so many Knicks games over the last few weeks. But to your point, I mean, if you looked at that front line right now, in the scope of right now, they're essentially starting 2 centers and a power forward. In today's NBA, you know what I mean? Charles Oakley is a center in today's NBA, and Anthony Mason is a power forward in today's NBA. Could be a center in some lineups, and some small lineups.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And Charles Oakley, and to you know what, to credit Charles Oakley, is just a better passer than I remembered him being. I didn't realize how good of a passer he was until really running it back and seeing. I mean, he threw every pass the exact same way. He threw them like he was sick of holding the basketball. But they were always on target. You know what I mean? It's not as pretty as when Joker throws a pass, but it was still effective.
No, he's chucking the ball as hard as he can.
As hard as he can.
That's a big, powerful guy.
Yeah. You're either going to catch it or you're going to break a fucking hand. So, not a lot of room for error. And yeah, I mean, they go against these. And so one thing I do want to say, there was this one play. I think it's in the '93 playoffs, where just to give credit to the defensive presence that MJ is, where Patrick catches the ball on the left block and does a turnaround, turns baseline to shoot over Wennington, and here comes over Cartwright, and here comes MJ weak side. It ends up being a foul, but MJ dives in weak side and eats that shit. Yeah, and it's like you're just not seeing guys do that. You know what I mean? Yep. You see Kawhi try that. You know what I mean? You'll see Kawhi do that, but you're not seeing any person. You're just not seeing. Oh, or Dwayne Wade in his prime. That is like the Dwayne Wade thing. Who's one of the leaders in blocks amongst guards. I think he still leads guards in blocks actually. Who would come just weak side and block a fucking center. You know who else used to do that randomly? This has nothing to do with any of the guys we're talking about. Was Nate Robinson. You know what I mean? Who would just come out of nowhere and block the shit out of somebody, one of the big dudes. That's like a Nate Robinson special.
You got a famous one on Yao Ming.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. He fucking shout out to Nate, man. Shout out to Nate. But anyway, point being, and that is emblematic of Patrick's career. You know what I mean? It's just he can't get past MJ blocking that, which is this is why when they asked Horace Grant, could the Bulls beat the Lakers? And Horace Grant's answer was, well, yeah, MJ would find a way to neutralize.
He would find a way.
It's because of plays like this. You know what I mean? That's like, he wasn't fucking scared of your size.
Nope.
And that's the story of Patrick's career, who now, I don't think people remember him poorly, but, couldn't get a coaching job. Was kind of bullshit, honestly, with what happened to him. But then gave us one of the most famous clips in college, which is a one-legged turnaround. When have you practiced that shot?
You practiced that shot? When? When you practiced that?
I used it for Andre, who did that step back 3-pointer when he got to the Cavs this year, and I immediately found that GIF and posted it because it was just so fucking relevant. Anyway, shout out to Patrick, one of the best centers of all time. Really, the '90s is not a golden era per se for centers, but it's like the golden era's child, which is if the golden era is Kareem, Wilt, and Bill Russell all occupying the same space, Willis Reed occupying the same space at the same time. Well, the '90s is a homage to that. You know what I mean? Where it's all of these great centers occupying the space. So, who you got next?
It's the silver age. It's the silver age of centers.
That's a great way to put it. That's why you're on here. Just eloquent. You know what I mean? All right, go ahead. Who you got next?
I want to say this about Oak, though, even though it's not about him. Charles Oakley would be a better player in 2020 than he even was in the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. Much better passer he ever got credit for. Was actually a good jump shooter, and I'm positive he never got practice time shooting jump shots. Mm-hmm. And was a hard defender. Like he wasn't as part of the reason the Bulls traded him, and which pissed Michael off, was he was a little lumbering. Mm-hmm. But as a center in today's game, he wouldn't be able to switch as well as a lot of other guys, but would have been a perfectly fine, suitable center, and you could run your offense through him a little bit in the post. As a passer, a lot like Draymond.
That's a great point. And actually, there was I don't know if you see the NBA Together thing. Every night at 8 p.m. they broadcast the game on Twitter, YouTube. They go live, and they played the other day was Vince going for 50. And in that game, Oakley shoots a couple 3-pointers. You know what I
Yep.
mean? He was shooting them at a time when nobody would have expected him to do it. So in today's NBA game, 100%, he would have had the opportunity to spot up and shoot, and would have probably been a more effective shooter just with how the NBA has
Yeah.
changed today. Was
He would have practiced
100%
it more.
ahead of his time. You know what I mean? Yeah, definitely ahead of his time. Not the most skilled around the basket per se, but
No.
would still be an effective roller at the very least, and would set fucking screens that are. If you give Steph Charles Oakley, Steph is shooting threes. He shoots 17 a game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So wide
and
open.
gobbles up every rebound.
Correct. Yeah, exactly right. So and if he doesn't, like you said about Draymond, you know that Draymond made a career on that play. Set the screen for Steph. They both collapse on Steph. He occupies the middle, gets the pass, immediately passes to someone cutting. Well, Oakley would have made that play 1,000 times out of 1,000. So yeah. This is not about Oakley, but Oakley better than people remember. This is the perfect podcast to reminisce about Oakley.
Talk about Oakley.
Really, yeah.
Yes.
All right, so go ahead. Who you got next?
All right, so my next guy, whom I love, never watched play, obviously, but in particular, I have him on here for Sixers fans. Is Hal Greer. Hal Greer.
I knew you were going to do Hal Greer. I don't know why I didn't even consider that you would do Hal Greer. But yeah, go ahead.
Man, the forgotten great Sixer.
Yeah.
He plays his whole career for what ends up becoming the Sixer franchise, which originally was the Syracuse Nationals.
Mm-hmm.
After the Warriors and Athletics leave Philadelphia and move to like the San Francisco area, the Golden State area, you have the Nationals move down to Philly and change their name to the 76ers. But Hal Greer, 15 years, 10 All-Star appearances. One of the few guards in that era to finish in the 20,000 point club. He plays on that 66, 67 Sixers with Wilt to win the NBA championship. They beat the Warriors, ironically enough, in the finals. And before that Lakers team that we talked about earlier, they were the winningest team, or had the winningest season in NBA history, with 68 wins, which again can kind of sound almost like it's not a big deal because of the 73-9 Warriors, the 72-win Bulls, but 68 wins is still a ton of wins.
Yeah.
And although Will is one of the most dominant players ever, Hal is just a regular sized person. Like, he's like 4 inches taller than me, but like weighs less than me. You know, he's at 175 pounds, averaging like 20 points a game. His career was pretty amazing. So for his career, he's just under 20 a game. At his peak, he was like 25 points, 5 assists, and 4 rebounds. And in the playoffs, 20.6 rebounds and 4 assists. So a really, really strong career that never gets mentioned, even amongst Sixer greats and amongst Sixer fans. Like, you could argue that he is the second greatest 76er of all time because of what he accomplished in his time here.
Yeah. And look, let's talk about this real quick. Shout out, credit to AI, one of the best Sixers of all time, obviously. And probably arguably the most famous Sixer of all time. But for all of AI's scoring prowess, Hal Greer is still the all-time Sixer scoring leader. I think if you ask the common, you could probably ask maybe not. I was going to say like the Rice and Ricky Sanchez podcast because I wanted to hate on them. But you could ask Spike, who was a Knicks fan, before he comes here and all of a sudden is this big Sixers fan apparently. Not to hate. I'm sorry. I don't mean to have such a negative.
Nah, leave it in.
Yeah,
Leave
fuck
it
that.
in.
Yeah. Who's all of a sudden he's now a fucking Sixers fan because your daddy is a cocksucker? Fuck out of here. Anyway, fucking Eskins, the bane of the Philadelphia man's existence. Let me tell you something about the fucking Eskins here. And the radio, we're not going to talk about radio, Philadelphia radio, and how shitty it is. I am here because Philadelphia radio was so terrible. Anyway, you could ask someone like Spike, yeah, hey, who do you think is the all-time Sixers leader in scoring? And a guy like him might say AI, and I wouldn't be surprised. And to not even to disparage him, not only would I not be surprised, but I wouldn't even be mad at him for thinking that, because AI has become such a like a mascot almost for the Sixers. He literally becomes a mascot when they make Hip Hop the fucking Bunny, the most racist goddamn thing I've ever seen in my life. Hey, let's make a Hip Hop Bunny and put a do-rag on him with shades as soon as we draft AI. What the fuck? Anyway, as much as I miss Pat Croce, that was a misstep by Pat and the team. Anyway, so back to Hal Greer. So Hal Greer is the all-time Sixers leader in points by about 2,000 points or so. 10-time NBA All-Star. Famously would shoot free throws jumping. He would shoot a jump shot free throw, which I don't know if you're even allowed to do that now. I don't know if
you are.
I was about to say you might be allowed to.
Yeah, you are. At every level, you can jump at the free throw line.
Okay.
It's just you're taught not to, because, like it's just the less. So think of it like a machine. Less gears means less opportunity to mess up.
More repeatable.
The only reason people jump is because you're being defended. But if you look at like footage from like the 1930s when the league started, a lot of guys are not jumping, but that's because they're not being guarded away from the basket.
Yeah,
like a jump shot is considered an awful shot in the beginning of the league, and a lot of them are even shooting it like underhanded.
Yeah.
So yes, you are technically allowed to jump at the free throw line.
Oh, see, thank you, Vic, again, bringing some fucking pitching fastballs here. No, that's a great point. That's a great point. I don't like. I don't jump at that. Who the fuck am I? I play at LA Fitness. But to the point, to that point though, you see even a lot of players when they're shooting jumpers, if they're open, still, I mean, it's not the same jump unless it's like Ray Allen who'll fucking jump out the gym just because he's a son of a bitch, or just because he wants to jump into some girl's DMs on Twitter and expose himself. I'm sorry, that's too much. Hal Greer.
Man.
To your point, one of the arguably you could argue is the second best Sixer of all time. I'd be fine with that. Plays 15 years in the league. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Right, 15 years in the league, 10-time All-Star, wins a championship in the midst of the greatest winner of all time occupying the NBA league, and Bill Russell essentially. It's the only time Will really goes head to head with Bill, right?
Russell.
Yeah, that's the only time he wins a championship against Bill. Anyway, that's a great point. I'm glad we brought up Hal Greer. Hal Greer is the Sixer that you don't respect or know about shit. You could ask a common fan, they might find say, well, Iguodala, I think, is. I'm like, no, he's not. Unless you say Embiid is the only right answer that you can say is the greatest Sixer of all time, or like Matisse. You know what I mean? I'll allow that, but other than that, it's Hal Greer. Great point.
They beat the Celtics in the division finals and then beat the Warriors in the NBA finals.
All right, great. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm 100. I obviously they were both in the East. So, great point. Beats the Warriors. That is, never mind. Is Barry on that team, or Barry comes later? I can't remember.
No, he's there.
Yeah, he's there, right? We could have done a Rick Barry here. I didn't put Rick Barry down, not to step on it.
Man, don't
stop.
Man,
okay,
on,
I got you.
Give me some time.
All right, take it. All right, so you know what? Let's stick with the Sixers here. This person doesn't end his career on the Sixers, but let's talk about Charles Barkley. I want to talk about Chuck because Chuck, again, very disrespected at this point in his life. People don't understand Chuck's greatness. Draymond has won championships, sure. Draymond can't hold a fucking candle to Charles Barkley all time in any form or fashion. Draymond shoots like he's wearing a backpack. He shoots like he's wearing a backpack of Charles Barkley's greatest highlights. You know what I mean? Which would be a backpack that weighs 1,000 pounds that Draymond can barely carry. That's why his shot is so fucking deformed, because he's been carrying that on his back. Charles Barkley, 14th in win shares all time. 14th in fucking win shares. Understand that when you're talking win shares, in a lot of respects, when you rank out like the top 10, 15 players, in some cases, you could almost just sort them by win share, and you would see it play out exactly that way, where MJ has the most win shares and LeBron has the second most win shares, and so on and so forth. And Charles is right up there. Every statistic favors Charles as one of the greatest players. 22 and 12 for his career, 4 assists, could run an offense around him, raises it in the playoffs. In the playoffs is 23, 13, and 4. Really pushes the conversation forward for what a power forward can do. In today's NBA, I mean, if you watch Charles Barkley highlights, especially early on, before he becomes the back to the basket like pounder that he becomes, Charles is like LeBron before LeBron. You know what I mean? Yep. He is grabbing a rebound, going coast to coast, and either making the right pass or finishing in a very dynamic way. He's the MVP in 93 over MJ, and you could argue MJ deserves that MVP. But let me tell you something. Charles earns that fucking MVP. It's not that Charles doesn't deserve it. Charles has one of the best seasons of all time. They win 63 games, I think, on that Suns team that finishes in first place on the West. They go head to head with the Bulls. He loses in 6 games, and it has nothing to do with Charles playing poorly, because Charles is just a fucking has a dominant series. I think he scores 51 game against the Bulls. I mean, by all accounts, this is just, by every statistical measure, this is one of the greatest power forwards of all time. And in fact, there's a legitimate argument that this is the second greatest power forward of all time, right behind Tim Duncan. You could argue Karl Malone if you want. You could argue, I mean, I see people will argue Dirk, or people will argue KG, and that's all well and good. It's fine. But Charles is the gold standard for power forward greatness before Tim Duncan comes at 6 or 7 inches taller than Charles, mind you. 7 inches. Timmy is basically a center that could move just like a power forward, but moves better than a power forward when he first comes in. Well, Charles is a 6'4", I don't give a fuck what anyone says, is a 6'4" phenom that just dominates everyone in the light of Willis Reed. Would gobble rebounds. I mean, just was above the fucking rim. One of the most athletic players you'll ever see if you've ever watched a Charles Barkley highlight. Charles is by far one of the most athletic guys you will ever see, especially in his prime. And to his credit, even starts expanding his game, shooting three-pointers, especially towards the end of his career, becomes a three-point shooter. His last season, his last time in the playoffs is 98-99. And in the series that they lose, that the Rockets lose, he scores, I think he averages like 29 a game or something like that. And that's fucking crazy. You know what I mean? This is his last series in the playoffs, and he leaves it all out there, man. Charles is, Sir Charles. He puts his foot in his mouth, and I get it. It's so fucking easy to shit on Charles and pile on top of him. But damn, this is arguably one of the 20 best players of all time. And yeah, Well, what you got to say about Charles?
Yeah, incredibly underrated because he's become such a entertainer. And sometimes the joke is at his expense. Or I would say a lot of the time the joke is at his expense. So when people see him now, it's hard to envision him as the force of nature that he was. And particularly because they're always making fun of him about being fat and eating donuts and cookies and stuff. But young Charles was a freight train, grabbing a rebound, going 95 feet and dunking on whoever was down there. And he's quoted as if you take a charge of me, I'm going to try and kill you. So do it if you want to, but I'm cool with the foul because you're not going to do it again. And And then, as you stated, in the early 90s or closer to the mid 90s, he changes from that, high power small forward to that back to the basket power forward, which they end up making the Barkley rule, where you can't be in the post for more than 5 seconds, because sometimes he couldn't even get the ball down there because they would double team him immediately, which was like even harder to do then with the illegal defense rules. But the defenses would pack it in, and so he would get the ball at like 19 feet and start posting up there, and just took his good old ass time to get close as he could to the rim and shoot the ball. But he was also a better passer than he ever got credit for. He wasn't always super interested in playing defense, but he has like a lot of really impressive shot blocks.
He grabs the ball out of the air a few times, if I'm not mistaken, right? A couple blocks where he just essentially grabs it out of the air and comes down.
And also, he especially when he was younger, would challenge the biggest, strongest guys in the league, which I think is, to his credit, his best attribute. As Chuck was never afraid. He's never, ever, ever afraid. And he wanted to be the guy, which I think sometimes was to his dismay. But it was like that back then. Like, you have the Pippen thing where he doesn't even go back into the game because his shot wasn't for him, because it's my team.
Yep.
I did this. The same thing for Chuck. You would watch games, and you could see him. He'd inbound the ball, talk to whoever his point guard is at the time, like maybe Kevin Johnson, and he's telling him, "I'm gonna go down here. You're gonna give me the fucking ball because you haven't given it to me in a few plays."
Yeah.
And the defense knows it's going to him now, so he's getting doubled and whatever. But he was a competitor. He was a competitor. That '93 series against the Bulls, it's just Michael again. It's like Chuck doesn't. I think Chuck's highest scoring game in that series is like a 40-point game.
Oh, 40. But, okay.
Yeah, that's the year that Michael drops the double nickel, the 55 against them, and his last 3 points come off and one against Charles Barkley at the end of the game to kind of like seal it.
Yep.
But that series, Michael's averaged 41 points a game.
Yep.
It's the highest average in a final series in league history. Like, he was probably at the height of his powers.
Yep. Yeah, and they fucked him by giving the MVP award to somebody else. You know what I mean? Which, especially back in the 90s, just to make this point, there is a long story or history of Hakeem David Robinson. Oh, David Robinson is the MVP. Let me tell you why I'm better than David Robinson, and I'm gonna bust his ass now in the playoffs. And they shot Charles in the foot by saying, "Here's the MVP. Now go play Michael Jordan real quick." But go ahead. I'm sorry.
It doesn't take much.
All right, and we're back. We had some audio issues, mostly because Vic was disagreeing with me. I'm joking. He wasn't disagreeing with me. I just wanted to make the joke. All right. So where do we leave off? We were talking about Charles Barkley. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think we said it all. Just a really good player, and like a lot of other really good players in different era probably would have won something, but doesn't get remembered as he should because of who he is now.
Yeah.
As sort of like an entertainer, and not a guy who is in the best shape.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if you see Blake Griffin is essentially is another version of Charles Barkley. Blake Griffin exists because Blake Griffin can run because Charles walked, and Blake doesn't reach the height of Charles ever. At Blake's best, and I'm starting to paint the picture for why CP3 is great, but at Blake's best, he doesn't hold the candle to Charles. And I like Blake. He's a great player, and at this point, especially in his career, he's become later career Charles, who is just like, give me the ball here, and I'm going to back you down for a while and use my strength, and I'm going to get this bucket. But also has improved his handles, but the passing, that piece, the part that you can build an offense around these guys, around Blake, for example, is because Charles existed. So, So yeah, let's move on to the next guy. Who you got next?
The next guy on my list is Rick Barry.
I'm sorry, I teased him earlier by accident. Go ahead.
You did. No, it's cool. Rick, 14 years, 12 All-Stars, 1975 Finals MVP. He's a top 10 player basically his whole career. He was also an All-Star MVP. He led the league in points once, free throw shooting 9 times. He's still the best free throw shooter ever, famously shooting underhanded. Led the league in steals. He was the best player on the 75 Warriors team that won the NBA championship, was on the team that lost to the Sixers team we mentioned earlier. Just had a really incredible career. His stats would have been even better if he would have left the game earlier. From the moment he steps on the NBA floor, he's averaging at least 20 points a game until the final 2 years of his league, where it drops from 23 in the 77, 78 down to 13 in 78, 79, and then 12 in 80. But at his best, he's averaging 35, almost 36 points per game, 9 rebounds, 4 assists, but shooting 89% from the free throw line and 45% from the field. The reason that I think he gets sort of knocked is because he was not the best teammate. Famously got mad at his team and decided to sign with the ABA for a few years just to prove a point. He has that famous game in the playoffs where he decides, I'm not going to shoot the ball because people are saying I'm selfish, to prove a point, which, by the way, Michael did too, that no one talks about. Michael Jordan also did that. But yeah, so I think the pendulum swung and like so far in the direction that he's a bad teammate, he was overrated, so now he's underrated, where he doesn't get talked about as one of the great players. It might also be because he shoots underhand. Grandma never shot free throws. And he's also a white guy.
Yeah.
So I think that plays a part in it as well. But even with all his flaws, he was an incredible NBA player. And although he was very hard to play with, his teams won games. He's very much sort of like the Oscar Robertson type. But if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure his teams won more games than the Oscars teams ever did until he went to Milwaukee.
Yeah.
So yeah, Rick Barry, 4th guy on my list.
Yeah, Rick Barry. Like you said, 36 points, 35.6. That's his career high, which is fucking ludicrous. Not only would his numbers be better if not for the last 3 years, but like you said, I mean, he spends 4 years in the ABA where he essentially averages 30 a game. If you just fold those numbers in to the NBA totals, then on the NBA list, he's higher than people realize. And also with shooting threes in the ABA. Had a 30% three-point shooting average in the ABA, or for his career, I should say. Before that's a thing, I mean, he's like he in the logo are very, very similar, except that you could argue Barry is a better scorer, like you said, the greatest free throw shooter of all time, shooting underhanded. And while everyone will always remember, people will always talk about the game today as this is the apex of the NBA, yet still no one shoots free throws better than Rick Barry. And that has remained the point. At one point, the one famous story is Wilt going to Rick Barry to learn how to shoot free throws, but Wilt doesn't want to shoot underhand. But the 1 year he does shoot underhand, he has a career best free throw shooting average. We know somebody at the gym who likes to shoot underhand because he's an asshole, but he makes them. And it's a thing, you know what I mean? And to your point, not the best teammate, not universally loved by his teammates. To reference Bill Simmons' book of basketball, he tells the story about how essentially he gets into a fight in the first half of a final of the Eastern Conference Finals. This is the Eastern Conference Finals that allows Jack Sikma a chance to go to the finals. Gets into a fight. He sees on a replay of the fight and realizes none of his teammates come to help. And second half famously stops shooting the ball. They lose. The Seattle goes to the finals and loses that year. Is that – I forgot who – oh, is that the year we win, actually? Am I tripping? No, I'm tripping. Is it?
I don't know. The Sixers play them in the finals.
Is that or is that the – no, man, do we win that year? I can't remember. I don't want to spend too much time here. No, we don't. We can't win that year, right? Against Jack Sikma? Is that the year that we go up? I thought that was against Portland. Didn't we lose to Portland in the finals, to Bill Walton?
Yes, in 77.
Yeah, that's the year we go up 2-0, and then they come back. Anyway, not to spend too much time on Jack Sikma's hair and Rick Barry. But Rick Barry
would have been out of the league by then.
You're right. You're right. But anyway, Rick Barry, one of the best scorers of all time, had 2 kids go to the NBA. One cool one that nobody likes. John Barry, no one likes him.
He's so annoying.
Everyone loves Brent Barry. He's the fucking man. Also won the dunk contest. Brent Barry won championships with the Spurs. And also won a dunk contest recreating the Air Jordan dunk, but not a third or a quarter as cool.
He didn't take his warm-up off.
No, he didn't.
He wasn't even sweating.
No, he didn't, and he took that shit. But he just, it just looked awkward doing it. You know what I mean? But credit to great callback, Rick Barry, one of the best players of all time, no question. One of the most effective scorers of all time. All right, cool. So to stay on the small forward path, you see, I'm trying to get a string here. To stay on the path of the small forward, my 4th player is the truth. Is Paul Pierce. Is another one that I picked because which is crazy. He's not that far removed from his career, but people now only remember him for saying stupid things on ESPN essentially, and clown him, and also because he got outed by Zach LaVine in the fucking horse, which I don't think a person. Listen, Paul Pierce in his prime wasn't going to be Zach LaVine in fucking horse. It's just not even fair. Like Zach is like, I think I can make this if I touch the top of the backboard and then come back under the rim and throw up a reverse. Like, well, who the fuck else can do this but you? So you know what I mean? But understand that Zach LaVine, not to draw this comparison, but Zach LaVine will never, ever, ever, ever finish anywhere near Paul Pierce. All time.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Pierce, 22nd all time in win shares, which is incredible. Plays for the Celtics. He got stabbed in the fucking face one time and finished the season. How's that for load management? You know what I mean? Career averages of 26-4, 45% shooter. Not a super efficient score, but this is also around the time in the NBA where there is a lot of these guys kind of floating around. Was a better defender than people realized. In the playoffs, his numbers dipped to 19, 6, and 3. But that's, again, to the point I was making earlier about some of these guys outliving their usefulness. His playoff career ends. He spends a lot of time in the playoffs. Understand, a lot of seasons he's in the playoffs. And I wanted to write that down. How many times all of these guys have been in the playoffs? Because if you look up their stats, you're going to see 14, 13 different playoff seasons for all of these guys. The end of his career, as a flounder, from the Nets to the Wizards to the Clippers, that's about 5 seasons of his playoff numbers going under 15 points a game. Before that, it's beautiful. And his shining moment is obviously they trade for KG, they trade for Ray. They go to the finals that year, and my man stares down LeBron James. That becomes a LeBron versus Paul Pierce battle. Both of them are battling each other, going basket for basket at certain points. And Paul Pierce comes out on top of that, goes and sees the Lakers, comes out on top of that in that series as well. And for at least that 1 year, we talked about Paul Pierce the same way we talk about Kawhi now, where it was like this guy went to the finals. Not necessarily we talk about him like that because we talk about Kawhi like he's the best in the league. But at that time, there was this there was just this thing that was like, we know Paul Pierce isn't the MVP of the league, but who wants to go bucket for bucket with Paul Pierce? And because he was clutch, he would do that little sidestep from the elbow, and he would drain that shit 100% of the time. I don't think I've ever seen him miss that shot in my life. And you know what I mean? And people forget him now, but this is like one of the baddest dudes in NBA history. When T-Mac and AI were scoring 50 and all this, Paul Pierce was right there with them doing the same exact thing, just not necessarily with the same flair, and didn't have the scoring outputs that they had, to be clear. But I mean, he has one game where I think he scores 40 on 14 shots or some shit like that, which is, that's like a fucking KD game. Like, you would think that's a KD type game in terms of efficiency, or like James Harden at his best, where he ends up with 20 free throws, and makes like 4 3-pointers out of 8. So, I just he gets disrespected now. I understand that. Me and you have had many arguments about Paul Pierce because I think he's better than you think he is. And that's because you're disrespectful, if we're being honest. You're just disrespectful. If you put Paul Pierce right now on the Hawks, they are championship teams, and I don't give a fuck what anybody says. All right? I don't care because this is my fucking podcast. No, they're not. But, would make a lot of teams better is the point I would make. Yeah. He's going to stroll into the Hall of Fame in the first ballot. It won't even be there won't even be a debate about it. And he deserves to go in. So, Paul Pierce, what you got to say about Paul?
What I love about Paul is his whole showdown with LeBron is essentially the second half of his career, which, and like he's even said this, like, man, I wish I would have went against him in my prime because, I might have got more wins against him. And maybe not. But what you love about Paul Pierce is that he's just a fierce competitor. Right? Never really wows you with any specific thing besides the fact that he finds a way to score. But he still is always a good defender, a good scorer, a good passer, a good finisher, free throw shooter. And he was never, ever afraid of the moment. Right? At the end of games, he's a guy you can go to and you felt comfortable that he was going to make the right play. My distaste for him is just because he was a Celtic and I didn't like playing against him because he was a motherfucker. But like I grew to appreciate him in particular with the whole Miami thing when
Ray went there.
Yeah, but then also just not being afraid to play against those teams, or like saw it as a challenge, and that's sort of the point. Is like Paul Pierce and like Dirk kind of being those last few guys of a different era. But yeah, what you can always love about Paul is that he was just a competitor.
Yeah,
a competitor. Nothing was necessarily amazing about his game. Like, oh man, he was like a really good jump shooter, but like not Ray Allen jump shooter. He was a good athlete, but obviously not LeBron athlete. He was a good defender, not Kawhi defender. But if you had Paul Pierce on your team, you were a good team.
Yeah, I agree. And to your point, there is now LeBron has grown into this point in his career where I think he sees the Warriors as like fuck y'all. You know what I mean? Fuck you guys. He doesn't have the friendship. He plays, they're all friendly, but I think he kind of is more like a fuck you guys to them. And before LeBron was that was Paul Pierce to LeBron and to the Heat and to all of them. It was us and y'all. You know what I mean? Even famously in that All-Star game, when Pierce, KG, and Ray Allen all go together,
and Rondo,
when they all go together, it's us and it's y'all. You know what I mean? It's us four, and then it's everybody else. We're not doing whatever the fuck y'all doing. And that to your point, and also one last what if. I mean, we should have probably drafted Paul Pierce. We ended up drafting fucking Larry Hughes, and that was a huge mistake. I'm sorry. It was a reach, whatever. We should have fucking reached for Paul Pierce instead. Which, I mean, who knows? Listen, who knows if Pierce and AI fit? But
Yeah.
obviously Pierce is. I mean, that's a fantastic draft because that's the Dirk and Paul Pierce draft, if I'm not mistaken. They come together in that
Yeah,
draft.
97,
Yeah, 97, I believe it is.
98, one of those.
Yeah, whatever the year after we draft AI is. A fan,
97.
97. Yeah, fantastic draft. That would be a great redraftables. Not that that's not what we do. The Ringer does redraftables. A redraft of real motherfuckers that just drafting shit. That's what we're gonna call it. But to the point, yeah, Paul Pierce, man, fierce competitor. Like you said, in the clutch. I mean, just so many clutch moments. You just know if the game is close, you're gonna have one of the baddest dudes to have the ball in his hands. You're gonna feel good if you're tied with 8 seconds left. If you're tied with 24 seconds left, if you're tied and you have Paul Pierce on your side, you're gonna feel really fucking good about your chances right now. Even if you're down 1, down 2, whatever, you're gonna feel good about it. So, yeah, credit to Paul Pierce, one of the greats. All right, who you got next? Who's your fifth guy?
Before my fifth guy, it was 98. It was
98.
Paul Pierce, Dirk, and Vince are all in that draft.
There
Vince
you
Carter.
go. Thank you.
But yeah, so my last guy is John Havlicek. Hondo.
Man, we got a lot of fucking. No, we don't have that many Celtics on here. No, we don't have that many. So never mind. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I have two technically, but
Yeah.
Kenny really had his best years not on the Celtics. But anyway, yes, have John Havlicek of 16 seasons, 13 of those being All-Stars seasons. Was the 1974 MVP. Essentially, all 13 of those years that he was an All-Star, he was considered a top 10 player. Was an all-defensive player 8 times, 5 of those being the first on the first team. He led the league in minutes a couple times. At the time he retired, I think he had the most, and that might not be the case anymore, but he had the most assists by someone who wasn't a guard. 4 championships. And as you were mentioning before, one of those guys whose stats actually got better in the playoffs. So for his career in the regular season, he's like a 21, 5, and 6 in the playoffs, 22, 7, and 5. And he's one of the members of the 25,000 point club. Sort of like the archetype of like, not necessarily the modern swingman because he wasn't the same kind of athlete that like you would see from Tracy McGrady or Vince Carter, but the archetype of like your best scorer not necessarily being your center or your shooting guard, being a forward who was tremendously skilled, right? Mm-hmm. Handling the ball, shoot the ball, finish, pass, and defend, all at a high level. Has that famous play in the finals where he steals the ball, the Havlicek stole the ball play. And particularly when we talk about small forwards, and I actually had, I guess, 2 of them on my list. But I think Havlicek even more so than Rick Barry because he had that legacy through his children. Mm-hmm. He gets forgotten.
Yeah.
He gets forgotten, and I mean, I know he played in the 70s, but an incredibly good player.
Yeah. No, to your point, Barry has a second life as a commentator for a while too. Barry is always by the NBA in some way or some form or fashion almost his entire life. I mean, listen, he's interviewed in Bill Simmons' book. Havlicek essentially steps away from the game and he just disappears. I don't think a lot of people knew where he went. To your point earlier about players having second jobs, he was a taxi driver, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah, right. He drove taxis in the off season. But not only that, even to a couple of your other points, I've heard the comparison, not necessarily just the comparison, but the Scotty's existence is because Havlicek preceded him at one point, a guy who could initiate your offense. Like you were saying, a swingman who could initiate your offense, an all-time defender, an all-time athlete at that time, famously plays in the he tries out for the Browns. He's on the Browns practice squad with Jim Brown. So he, he spends time with arguably at this time the greatest running back of all time, and also the greatest basketball player of all time, in Bill Russell. So Havlicek is a great one. Hondo, the reason why Rondo, and I don't know that this happened for a fact, but I definitely at this time felt like this was happening during this latter Celtics run. The reason why Rondo caught on so quickly was because the Hondo ghost lived, and it just felt like Hondo and Rondo, and it's like, oh, they sound the same, and it's like we're rocking out here. Again, on one of the all-time winningest teams, just in terms of championships, one of the best scorers of all time that no one talks about. One of the best defenders. I think that's a great way to top off your list. Honestly, that's a great cherry on top of your list. For John Havlicek, man, that's a great one. All right, so let's get into the whole point of this podcast, which is fucking Chris Paul. Is why I wanted to do this goddamn podcast in the first place. People have forgotten how great Chris Paul is, and we talked about this briefly on the All NBA podcast that we did, where people all he's been doing is winning everywhere he goes, essentially. So career, and this is going to surprise people. So get ready for this, because people have this idea that Chris Paul collapses in the playoffs. Well, in actuality, his numbers suggest he raises his game in the playoffs. 19, 10, and 5 essentially for his career. 2.2 steals, 47% shooter. Is 12th in win shares all time, 12th in win shares. So as I mentioned earlier, in a lot of cases, you could just run down the win share list and see that it matches up with the greatest players of all time list. If you did that, he's 12th all time on that list, ahead of Charles Barkley at 179 win shares. His playoff numbers: 21, 9, and 5, 48% field goal shooting. So it actually goes up a level. And the point here that I want to make, this is not a hot take. Chris Paul is easily one of the 5 best point guards of all time, in my opinion. It's just, where does he break in higher than that? You know what I mean? He's not Magic. Man, listen, you don't even let me talk about Chris Paul here, because I could convince myself he's the 2nd best point guard of all time. It wouldn't be that fucking hard. If you give Chris Paul, what hurts his career is somewhat the injury history. Some of it is maybe his teammates not getting along with him, but there's a revisionist history that exists that I want to take everyone down a quick trip on. His best, so the best players he's played with, essentially the best player he's played with ever is James Harden. After that was Blake Griffin. Now they are the James Harden Rockets are one Chris Paul hamstring away from possibly beating that Thunder team and going to the finals and getting the chance to get CP3 a ring, which they had a good chance. I think they had a good chance in that situation to win a championship against the Cavs. That Cavs team this is the Cavs team that has shipped off Kyrie at this point, and it's just LeBron and a band of misfits. And he never gets his fair shake, whatever. He gets hurt. Before that is on the Clippers, and because of all of the big dunks, all of the Blake Griffin dunks, people really have overrated Blake. And this is not to shit on Blake. Blake's a great player. Blake,
He's a good player.
Yeah, he'll go into the Hall of Fame. One year he finishes. One year he finishes in the top 5 in MVP voting. And even that is a little bit of a stretch, because it just forgets what Chris Paul means to every single team he's ever on. The whole reason why Lob City is even a city in the world is because Chris Paul came through and made it a fucking city. Before that is on the Hornets with David West, who makes it an All-Star that year that he joined. He makes an All-Star with Chris Paul. Arguably the best teammate on that team could be arguably Tyson Chandler. But it's not he's not played with a fucking band of great players. He's never went out and searched for a band of great players. He's just been Chris Paul, and that's just bring winning to wherever he's gone. Almost like Patrick, where he's kind of nestled in between the Steve Nash, Jason Kidd. Here comes Chris Paul. Then here we get all of a sudden Steph becomes fucking Steph, and then you get Kyrie and all these guys. People have forgotten that Chris Paul could shoot like Steph almost before Steph really takes off. Chris Paul is a great three-point shooter. Before Kyrie's handles turn into what they are, Chris Paul was the handle king in the NBA. I can't say enough. If you ask me to build my favorite team of all time, of favorite players, Chris Paul is my starting point guard. Because he's ever been is one of the best point guards of all time. And people have somehow weirdly disrespected him, but this dude is like arguably a top 20 player, top 25 all time, and rightfully deserved. And it's not over. Who knows where it finishes? So, go ahead. What you got to say about Chris Paul?
No, I agree. I actually in 2008, I think he was the NBA MVP. And Kobe ends up winning it, kind of like as like, Leo winning his Oscar, like was overdue.
Mm.
But yeah, I think so. My only real knock against Chris Paul is that I think he talks to the refs far too much.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just because no coach has ever like stopped him, and then playing for Doc Rivers doesn't help that regard. It only like enforces it. But everything else, though, you can't take anything away from him. Like his big not coming to the league, not a great shooter. What did he become? A very good shooter.
Mm-hmm.
He's small, very good defender though. Covers so much ground, and advanced metrics have shown how much ground he covers and how good of a defender he is, even to this day. After playing for so many years. I think, though, besides the ref thing, is what Chris Paul never really learned, and I think what he was forced to by the time he played for the Rockets is to trust his teammates more, let go of the reins a little bit, because then it just makes you harder to guard. It makes your team better when other players feel empowered and are a part of it. Even though, like, you could argue the best offense is just giving him the ball every play and letting him do something, it's easier to guard than having five guys who are totally engaged. And every great player that ends up winning goes through that. Or, like, famously, it's the Michael Jordan thing. Once they finally implement the triangle that takes the ball out of his hands and gives everybody a role to play and a movement to make, is part of the reason they start to win. Why players like Scotty and Horace Grant can now spread their wings and become the players they ultimately become, because everything isn't just based off what Michael wants to do that play. And I think that was, besides, again, yapping at the rest, was always the biggest flaw at CP3's game at his best on those Clippers teams. Is if Blake had the ball in his hand more and could develop into more of a passer and creator. And also, if they would have traded DeAndre and went in the small ball direction, I think a lot is different. But, yeah, still, though, a great player. And I agree. I think at this point is easily a top 5 point guard.
Yeah. No, I think all of that is great points, and even to reinforce what you just said about letting it go, he does that on the Rockets, comes over to the Thunder. This is not a good team necessarily. SGA is, at this point in his career, could be your third best player, but because Chris Paul has essentially allowed these guys to blossom, Dennis Schroeder and SGA, to handle the ball so much, Chris Paul kind of just takes it over when they need it, and here they are, 6th in the West. So, again, all he's ever done is go to franchises, bring a winning culture, and bang. You know what I mean? He easily could be your best player. So, that wraps up the list. Vic, as always, it's been a pleasure to talk basketball. I think we will do something like this again somewhat soon, because there are a million players that we can do this on. There's no shortage of them that people have completely forgotten. So, let's do this again. Vic, you got anything to plug before you go?
No, I guess I'm just waiting for my next assignment for the site so I can plug that.
Oh, why don't you give me a couple suggestions? Because I can't fucking do it all on my own. All right, everybody. Listen, wash your fucking hands. Everyone stay in the fucking house. We're almost there. We could have a summer. Just stop being dickheads. You know who you are, you sons of bitches. You disinfectant isn't going to make you feel better, all right? But you can fucking drink it and kill yourself if you want. Anyway, that's all I got. Take care, everybody.
Yo. Yo. Justice for the blind. Just something that'll find in the rhymes that are coming from my mind. Used to come in